17日間にわたって数々のドラマを生み、今月8日に閉幕した東京オリンピック。世界的パンデミックという前代未聞の状況下での開催は、日本や参加選手、またフジテレビ内のスタジオから放送したアメリカのスポーツ専門チャンネル ESPN は通常の5分の1の人数で対応するなど、各国のメディアにも様々な影響を及ぼしました。東京では盛んに抗議デモが行われ、今回の開催に関しては多くの議論が飛び交いましたが、アメリカではこのオリンピックはどのように見られたのでしょうか。オリンピックの模様を日本から連日伝えたアメリカ ABC ニュースの海外特派員ジェームズ・ロングマン記者に、コロナ禍での取材の様子やアメリカの反応などお話を聞きました。
So how was your overall experience in Japan?
Overall, it was amazing. For a lot of people to think about Japan hosting the Olympics, it was just going to be the most incredible event imaginable. And I think that's why going in, when we knew about what COVID was going to do to these Olympic Games, we were a bit worried. Maybe it wasn't going to be the full experience, what the Tokyo Games would have been, a celebration of an amazing country with such a deep and long culture. It was kind of going to be cut short or cut off somehow. And in the end, I'm afraid in many ways that was the case, but it felt to us like the Japanese were making the best of it, and it was still very special to be there.
Were you concerned about yourself, coming into Japan where COVID cases were rising?
I wasn't concerned about being in Japan generally because of COVID, because actually COVID levels in Japan are much lower than they are here in the UK, and they're much lower than they are in basically every country. I think I was concerned that going into the Olympic bubble, where all these people were coming from around the world, that could be a super spreader event. But I was tested every day for 7 days before I left. I was put into quarantine in Tokyo. I had to spend 3 days in quarantine where I was tested every day. And then after that, I was tested every 4 days. So actually, my main concern was getting a false positive test.
But were you pretty comfortable with the protocols that they had?
Yeah, I mean, I understood them. The Japanese wanted to put in lots of rules. They like a rule. They like following a rule, but they're not sure how it all works because it's all so new. So it was like everyone was trying to work out the system, but no one really knew what it was. And all the Tokyo 2020 officials wanted to abide by the rules, but they didn't really know what they were. So everyone was trying to help each other out.
Well, amongst the foreign correspondents, were you able to communicate?
No, we tried very hard to stay away from other news teams. Even within our own group, there were 3 correspondents for ABC, because if we spent too much time together, if we both went down with COVID, then ABC would no longer have an operation.
今回、選手村での滞在が短縮され、選手が入村できたのは原則競技開始の5日前。
The American athletes, how do you think they were feeling coming into this Olympics with this COVID going around?
I think it would have been very stressful for them because a lot of preparation in sport is about routine. It's about doing the same thing every day and making sure that you're ticking every box with your food and your sleep and your exercise and training. So I think incredibly stressful, especially because coming from the United States, you need time to acclimatize. You have to acclimatize to the time, but also the weather. So I think it speaks to how incredible a lot of them are that they managed to keep their focus.
Tell me about the heat. How did you take this?
I'm used to heat, but wow, it's like walking into an oven every day. Some of the venues, it was okay, but the skating, we went down to the skateboarding. The venue was beautiful, but it was so hot. I was like, how are they doing this? It was like an Olympic sport being in the stands, let alone actually performing in the Olympics. I could only be there for 10 minutes before we had to leave. I couldn't breathe. The beach volleyball, they measured the temperature of the sand. It was 53 degrees on the sand.
You can get burned for that.
I mean, you could cook food I mean, we saw when you're in the stadium and you're watching, I think at the end of the 10,000, these people were passing out. They had to be taken away in wheelchairs because it was just unbelievable. So I think it's something that more Summer Olympics are going to have to think about. You know, we live in a warming climate now. Summers are getting warmer. Paris in the summer can get really hot. So we'll see what happens in 2024.
From what I see, they took the right precautions. I'm glad it happened. You know, I was actually supposed to go in 2020, but it got canceled. But it was good to see it still went on.
Tokyo did a very good job pulling it off. It wasn't easy, obviously, but it was still kind of a diminished event because not having the fans there, it was not the same.
My husband did a lot, like almost all the games.
I watched a little bit. It's like you waiting for that during the summer.
I saw the triathlon. I saw the women's gymnastics. I saw some of the swimming, some of the track and field, and I found it very interesting and I enjoyed it.
ニューヨークの街ではテレビで観戦したという声が多く聞かれましたが、今年アメリカでのオリンピックの視聴者数は前大会と比べおよそ半数に。
I think mostly people saw it as maybe almost like not a real Olympics because they thought the impression was that it was going to be very, very pared down, wasn't going to be as big as the usual Olympics. The big stars are not going to be there. So I think the impression after these 2 weeks has been, okay, well, they managed it, but we'll have to wait and see the real Olympics in 2024. That's probably the sense of it.
It's said that the TV ratings in America for the Olympics are going down and people are losing interest. You reporting almost actually every day from Japan to the United States. Did you feel the excitement or was it not so much?
It was less. I mean, there was interest. We actually had very high ratings at ABC because I think people saw it as a news event rather than a sports event. Yes, people were excited to watch the sport, but what does an Olympic Games during a pandemic look like? When we heard about an athlete testing positive for COVID. What about the restrictions? How angry are the Japanese people that they're having an Olympic Games that they can't go to? So there were news issues that I think people at home cared about over and above the sport. And I think that's why you saw a difference maybe in the ratings. But look, the Olympics is very popular. Americans love to see US athletes winning, and they still came out on top. They still won the most golds, won the most medals. So for a lot of people at home, it was still a success.
今回のオリンピックで大きな話題となったのは、前回金メダルを4つ獲得した体操女子のスーパースター、シモーン・バイルス選手が精神的なストレスを理由に団体総合決勝を途中棄権。個人競技決勝も次々と棄権したことでした。
Now you were at the women's gymnastic games, and when Simone Biles announced that she was not going to compete, what was your first impression?
Well, first of all, it was very unclear what had actually happened because she did her vault. Now, she didn't land it very well, but she landed it. And then she went off to talk to her coach, and then she put her tracksuit on, but she was still there. So it wasn't like there was this moment where everyone was like, oh my God, Simone Biles is out of the Olympics. It was this kind of slow realization that something wasn't right. It was like complete shock because she was the face of Team USA for these Olympic Games.
体操女子個人種目別の最終種目平均台でバイルス選手は競技に戻り銅メダルを獲得。
Everyone at the Olympics who could go was there. If you looked, you could see all the stands were empty except for the space right in front of the beam. The chairman of the IOC, Thomas Bach, he was there. I mean, everyone was there. And it was incredible. We were all holding our breaths watching her on the beam because it's actually not her favorite event. It's like the one she doesn't like. And that was the one she competed in. But to see the sportsmanship amongst them was really special. She went quite early on, and so she was in silver position for the whole of the event until right at the end when I think her name is Guan Chen, the Chinese athlete. She got up on the beam, and Simone knew that if this girl did well, she was going to get bronze and she was going to lose her silver. But she was there clapping her on, cheering her on, making sure that she was doing well. It was amazing. And then she got gold and Simone got bronze. And so that was nice. It was nice to watch that kind of camaraderie.
There were a lot of talks about the mental status of the athletes. And also during this Olympics, there was this LGBTQ stories. Do you think this Olympic, with all these stories, would change the future Olympics?
I think so. I think it changes how we see athletes, that they're not one-dimensional machines that are just there for our enjoyment, and that they're human beings like anybody else, and that there's a lot of stuff going on in their lives outside of sport, which is almost equally challenging. I think seeing someone like Tom Daley win gold and then speak about being a gay person on television next to Chinese athletes, knowing that these comments are going to be seen in China, a country which does not support gay rights. There was something very powerful about that. Simone Biles, to talk about her mental well-being and that she didn't realize that people loved her aside from her gymnastics. Again, I think there was something really powerful in that. So yeah, I think hopefully maybe we'll see more of this in future Olympic Games. And it was Tokyo that started it.
Now, how do you think this Tokyo Olympic will be remembered in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it'll be seen as like the Olympics that should never have happened, but somehow Japan did it. It shouldn't have gone as well as it did. Like, I think that we expected it to become a super spreader event, and it didn't. Social distancing is like the Japanese invented that before anybody else. So
they're not close anyway.
Kind of, yeah, exactly. And we wear masks anyway. So like, it did feel safe.
Now that's all over, do you think this was a success?
I think so. It was certainly a success for Japan. If you look at the medals, I mean, they got the highest number of medals they've ever got, did amazingly well in so many different sports. I think the failure, if there is one, was perhaps that more Japanese people were not allowed to go to these events. That, for me, if I were Japanese, that's the question I would be asking. Because really, being in those events, being in those venues, there was a way to keep people safe and to allow them to watch. If they'd thought about it properly, they probably could have had a separate entrance for Japanese people, and they could have had 20,000, 25,000 Japanese coming to watch in the stadium, at least to be able to experience it. There was a way, especially when you think that baseball games were continuing the whole way through. There were music concerts. This was for me, it looked like, and I can't make the judgment myself, but it looked like more of a political decision on the part of the Japanese authorities than one driven by health concerns. Because if they're really worried about health, they would cancel the baseball games.
最後にこのオリンピックを一言で表してもらいました。
Complicated. Everything about it was complicated. Yeah, because no one really knew what the rules were, but we knew there were a lot of them, and we were trying to work through it.
Okay. So thank you, James, so much for your time, and hope.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.